Good morning to all. This BNamericas webinar is about to start. Please hang in there while all attendees connect. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Cesar Iliano and I'm the content director for BNamericas. I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar in which we will analyze the Capex forecast for the main oil and gas companies with interests in Latin America. Our senior managing editor, Sebastián Pérez Ferreiro, will start the session showing some charts that summarize the main findings of our oil and gas Capex report 2021. Then, our regional energy editor, Michael Place, will hold a conversation with Jorge Milanese, Regional Director Latin America for Sproule, and Giovani Loss, partner at oil and gas specialist at law firm Mattos Filho in Brazil, to discuss the investment landscape for the oil and gas industry in Latin America. I'd like to remind all participants that they are in listen-only mode. Questions can be submitted at any time using the chat function on the right side of the screen. Depending on time, we will endeavor to answer your questions at the end of the discussion panel. So now I leave you with Sebastián. Sebastián?
Thank you, Cesar. The global oil and gas market recovery continues apace, and Latin America is poised to reap the benefits. Companies with E&P operations in the region plan to raise capital investments by around 13% this year, breathing new life into a sector hammered by COVID-19. The improving outlook coincides with rebounding oil reference prices as Brent crude futures reach pre-pandemic levels. Oil's international benchmark has more than tripled in value since global lockdown measures pushed prices to decades-old lows in April 2020. And there is every indication that the commodity will continue to gain ground in the coming months as global energy demand outstrips supply. By the fourth quarter, Goldman Sachs expects oil prices to surpass $80 a barrel for the first time in more than 3 years, despite the prospect of surging production in Iran. According to the latest available figures compiled by BNamericas, 27 of Latin America's main oil and gas operators expect to invest nearly $165 billion on capital projects this year, compared to about $145 billion in 2020. 10 of the largest E&P players with a presence in the region have a combined capital guidance of nearly $116 billion, up from executed expenditures of nearly $106 billion in 2020. In their first quarter earnings calls, oil field service giants Halliburton and Schlumberger singled out Latin America as a key driver of drilling activity growth. Halliburton cited robust demand for multi-product service lines in Argentina and Mexico, as well as its expanding fluid service business in the Caribbean. Schlumberger said Latin America first quarter revenue climbed 7% from the fourth quarter, reflecting increasing production system sales in Brazil, higher intervention and stimulation activity in Argentina, and a well construction uptick in Ecuador. Shell leads the way with $21 billion in proposed spending, up from $16.5 billion last year, and ahead of ExxonMobil with $17.5 billion, CNOOC $15 billion, Chevron $14 billion, BP $13 billion, and total $12.5 billion. In Brazil, Shell is working on the development of the Gato do Mato field in the Santos Basin pre-salt, where first oil is expected midway through the decade. The company operates 18 offshore exploration blocks in the country. In Latin America, Exxon will prioritize Guyana and Brazil. In Guyana, Exxon made 3 discoveries in 2020, bringing the total to 18, while increasing estimated gross recoverable resources to nearly 9 billion barrels of oil equivalent. This year, it plans to drill 10 exploration and appraisal wells in the region. Looking at CNOOC's plans, the first phase of development at its Mero field in Brazil was cited as one of the priority projects for the company this year. The company also holds assets in Trinidad and Tobago, Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico. The region's 6 largest national oil companies, excluding Venezuela's PDVSA, for whom reliable figures were not available, have budgeted $43.3 billion, up from $39.8 billion in 2020. By far, the biggest spender will be Mexican state oil company Pemex, which has set aside $24.6 billion, down from $26.3 billion in realized investments last year. Next is Brazil's Petrobras, with planned capital expenditure of $10 billion, followed by Colombia's Ecopetrol with $3.75 billion, Argentina's YPF, $2.7 billion, Ecuador's Petroecuador, $1.45 billion, and Bolivia's YPFB with $789 million. Another group of 11 operators we studied also shows clear intentions to accelerate spending this year. Among them is Hess, which unveiled a global upstream Capex guidance of $1.9 billion, up from $760 million last year. A key focus of the investments is the Stabroek block in Guyana, where it plans to have at least 6 floating production, storage, and offloading units operating by 2027. Another interesting number comes from Geopark. The company lifted its 2021 Capex target to a range of $130 to $150 million, almost double the 2020 outlay of $75 million. Some 75 to 90 million have been allocated to development activities and 55 to 60 million to exploration. The company plans to drill 37 to 42 gross wells, including 7 or 8 exploration prospects, while acquiring 400 square kilometers of 3D seismic data. The last table shows what the next 4 years will look like for the oil and gas industry, as we see healthy Capex figures from local and global operators. Despite the optimism, the region has no shortage of challenges. Most major E&P companies still consider Venezuela off limits, as the oil-rich nation grapples with ongoing economic and political turbulence. And in Mexico, the policy agenda of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has dented confidence in the energy sector. Meanwhile, social unrest in Colombia severely impacted oil and gas operations in May and prompted S&P Global to downgrade the country's credit rating to junk. Even considering these headwinds, the prevailing mood among investors in Latin America's hydrocarbon plays is one of hope and expectation, as a slew of new exploration opportunities arise, particularly in deep water basins off Brazil, Guyana, and Suriname. After this overview of the region, I now leave you with Michael Place, our energy regional editor.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm joined by Jorge Milanese, the Latin America Director of Global Energy Consulting Company Sproule, and Giovani Loss, who is a partner and oil and gas specialist at law firm Mattos Filho. Good morning, Jorge and Giovani. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you for the invite to this webinar, and congratulations and happy birthday to BNamericas. I understand that this is your 25th anniversary this year, so very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, same on my side. Very happy to be here. I enjoyed a lot the presentation in the beginning, and I'm sure we will enjoy the discussions.
Fantastic. So Jorge, let's start with you. As we've seen in the presentation, oil and gas capex is rising across the region as coronavirus restrictions ease and also vaccine programs accelerate. When do you believe investments will recover to pre-COVID levels?
Well, it's already happening in several countries, as we saw in the previous slide, like in Brazil, Colombia, Argentina. However, you know, the pandemic is already going around Latin America, and so we have seen other external factors that are, you know, impacting or influencing this investment. Like in Argentina, for instance, the country has put in place several incentives in order to resume drilling in Vaca Muerta. And there are several companies that have mobilized drilling equipment or restarted drilling, but the pandemic is still in the middle. So there are multiple factors that are affecting this will or this decision by oil and gas companies. Other countries are still lagging behind, but overall, in general, I would say that Latin America, as Schlumberger, and you pointed out that as well in your presentation, Schlumberger has identified the region as one of the major points, the bright points of recovery after the pandemic. In general, Latin America is a region with conventional production, so companies, they know very well how to stop and resume production and how to be efficient, even in low oil prices environments. So I think that the recovery will continue throughout 2022, 2021 and 2022. So hopefully we can see pre-pandemic levels of production definitely established in 2022.
Fantastic. And Giovani, what's your view on that? When do you see investment levels recovering to pre-COVID levels, pre-COVID amounts?
Yeah, so I have read the reports, the forecasts from the biggest or most relevant agencies around the world for energy. So when you think about demand, the best predictions say that we will get back to pre-COVID in 2025 in terms of demand, and I'm not talking about investments, but demand. And in the worst case scenario, by 2029, we would return to pre-COVID levels in terms of demand for oil. But my impression, similar to Jorge, is that when you think about investments in E&P, companies are, because oil prices are at the moment high, and they have to do investments now so that they get production within a couple of years, right? They need to advance their investments and considering the demand. So we've been seeing a growth in terms of investments and capex, and the presentation showed that. I think we will see this growth keep happening in 2021, 2022, like Jorge mentioned. My impression is that maybe later 2022 or 2023, we will reach pre-COVID levels for investments in E&P. When you think about Latin America, also there is a difference between Latin America and the US, for example. US definitely, because the private parties, they own the oil resources on the ground, and the contracts they are, and the pace of the production is much more driven by the private parties agreements rather than and finances rather than the government. I think we may see the US at some point moving forward faster than other countries because of that. When you think about Latin America, if you think about new exploration, we actually need government to have bid rounds, for example, and we expect this to start happening on the second semester of 2020. but to 2021, sorry, but moving forward on 2022. So that's basically the big picture. My impression is that by 2023, for sure, and similar to what Jorge mentioned, we should be in a similar position to pre-COVID level in terms of investments in E&P, considering demand growth that should reach pre-COVID levels at 2025 or later.
Okay, very interesting. Given this optimism, I guess we can call it cautious optimism, do you think we'll see an acceleration in final investment decisions over the next 12 months in oil and gas projects? Perhaps this time we can start with Giovani.
Yeah, I think final investment decisions, they're very much tied to the markets and the oil prices and the financing related to a project. What we see now are capital markets in a good position. So companies have been able to raise capital, have been able also to do IPOs. We have low interest rates and capital markets in a very high scenario at the moment. And at the same time, oil prices, we have reached over $70 per barrel. And we expect the forecast that we see is that we may reach above 80 still in 2021. So it would make sense that we have more final investment decisions happening in the next 12 months. It also would make sense that we see in 2022 more companies getting listed in the oil and gas business, or at least raising capital through the capital markets, and of course a lot of investments related to that.
Great. And Jorge, what's your view on that?
Well, I fully agree. I think that Giovani has excellent remarks on these. Final investment decisions are, of course, economical decisions. The other point that perhaps we have to remember is that in Latin America, licenses are different from other parts of the world, particularly in North America. So in certain cases, companies have committed to do investments according to a calendar that is part of the license. And that is, of course, has some flexibility, and we have seen the regulators, particularly in Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, putting some flexibility around those calendars. But at one point, companies will have to decide and go ahead with these commitments. So 2020, everything was on pause. Nobody was doing FIDs or major FIDs, except for some exceptions, like in Guyana, for instance, in Stabroek. But in other regions, we are starting to see more activity around FIDs because the calendar, the clock is ticking, and companies have to comply with those commitments. So I think that 2021, 2022, as we said before, it will be a catch-up period where companies will have to decide on these investments. So far, what we have seen in terms of Capex is very much geared towards recovering production. So I think that when we reach to that level, additional investments and FIDs on discoveries or additional phases or development will start to take place. Definitely, recovery in the oil price is helping and is putting, a light at the end of the tunnel for most of the companies in Latin America.
Speaking of the light at the end of the tunnel and oil prices, we're seeing prices back in the high 60 range per barrel at the moment, compared to a little over 20 this time last year. What type of Brent prices, what range of Brent prices do you both seeing companies using for their guidance for 2022? Perhaps, Jorge, we can start with you this time.
Okay, definitely there is more optimism than a year ago. My company does a quarterly projection of prices. If you go to Sproule.com and you look for forecasts, you will see the latest forecast. So we are using in our projections starting with 61.50 for Brent at the beginning of 2022 and ending around 60. So around $60–65 per barrel is the projection that we are using. That is we believe is reasonable and is prudent. We feel that oil prices will still be rocky, going up and down throughout the cycles. But definitely everything above $60, I think, is a good news overall for Latin America in terms of economies on different regions, particularly for new offshore developments. This type of prices are sparking more and more decisions around new developments.
Very interesting. Giovani, how do you see prices? If I can just add a little kind of extra to that question, we're talking about break-evens as well, I guess, here. And how do you see oil prices for 2022? And what are the break-evens that companies in Brazil, for example, deep water operators need to, to be profitable? What are the prices they need to be profitable in offshore Brazil?
Okay, when you think about break-even, even in ultra deep water, because our level of production is very efficient. I mean, those fields are very productive. Initially, we thought our break-even would be $60 or $70, but actually, in the end, because they are so productive in the fields, and also we have new technologies and cheaper technologies, we ended up going to a lower break-even of maybe $40 per barrel or even lower than that. So it's those, when you think about prices like mentioned by Jorge, I mean, they already work very well even for Brazil and our offshore production. So I think it would work for all Latin America above $60 barrels pricing of oil. In my view, I am a little bit more optimistic, but of course, differently from Jorge's company, I don't have to put my my impressions online so that people invest their money. But personally speaking, I'm more optimistic, just because my view is that oil prices in 2022 would be higher than 80 on average. And the way I see is that until the U.S. market has really recovered, we have a big player that is like uncontrolled player with all those productions from the U.S., unregulated productions, let's say, not competing, which usually takes the prices very low. So we would have a production that is very much controlled by countries and state-owned companies, and in this case, they would control the price of production in accordance with consumption to keep the prices, I would say, high or a little bit high. So that's why I see prices going even above 80 on average for 2022. I think, of course, there are many factors that could impact that. But generally speaking, because we had so much retraction in terms of investment in exploration and production, it takes a little bit of time for people to pick up. Also, and especially in the US, many companies actually going under because the market was so low in the US. So until they reorganize themselves, let's say one of the biggest players, or at some point the biggest player, is not going to be competing at the same level, and I think this will make the prices higher.
Excellent. I'd just like to remind our audience that you can ask a question at any time using the control panel on the right side of your screen. I think we've had a few questions already. We'll endeavour to answer those at the end of this discussion panel. Going to the next question, it doesn't seem that long ago that the general consensus was that global oil demand would not begin to decline until at least 2040 or around that time. But most experts now are predicting that will be much sooner, and some are even saying that could happen this decade. when do you both see peak oil demand occurring, and has the coronavirus pandemic accelerated this process? Perhaps, Giovani, we can begin with you.
I think that what we have seen, let's say, advancing and progressing faster is discussions about energy transition, right? Especially coming out of Europe. We see many companies and countries debating about energy transition. And of course, this will affect demand for oil, right? And potentially reduce demand. However, we have still not found a appropriate replacement, at least for gas, when you think about power production and when you move out of hydropower, and when you consider that wind and solar actually are very much flexible in terms of sources of energy. They are not reliable because they depend on weather conditions. So the way I see it, and when you think about the peak of oil, first, the industry historically has moved that date or the expectation of the date over the years, right? And always extending and extending and extending. I think the question now is with energy transition, actually this extension would no longer make sense, right? For peak, and eventually because countries would no longer incentivize oil production or consumption, this would affect demand. In my view, it's not still the case. I think that energy transition, it is a big topic and important topics, and oil companies are embracing that. But if you think about percentage-wise of the amount of investment, or even of the level of attention that they give to that, is still at the beginning, right? So my view is that we will take a few decades yet to reach the peak. I would say maybe 2040 or 2050 even, not so early. I'm not so, let's say, optimistic about reaching the oil peak, or at least as an oil guy, I would say I'm still optimistic that oil will be there for a long time as an important source of energy around the world.
Excellent. Jorge, what are your views on peak oil demand?
Yeah, that is a difficult question indeed. You know what they say, that if you use a crystal ball, you learn how to eat crystal, because you probably have to eat your own predictions sometime from now. But you know, I want to connect this with the previous question, and we talk about efficiencies and low cost, and I get recurrently the question of what is going to happen with all these new discoveries, like in Guyana, more deep water developments in Brazil. And the answer for that is that the lowest price or the lowest cost oil is the oil that will continue to be produced. So I think that in terms of peak oil, of course, there will be something globally, but as we are talking about Latin America, I think that Latin America will continue to see increases in the production for many, many years to come. And one of the reasons is that the oil is produced very cheaply, so it's very competitive, even at very low oil prices. Throughout the pandemic, for instance, Brazil increased oil production. Isn't that remarkable? It's something that we have to think and pause about that. So I believe that in the case of Latin America, it will continue to be a net exporter of energy, oil, and hopefully more natural gas as well, for many, many more years. And I agree with what Giovani has said, that a lot of investment has to be made in order to replace this. And although it seems that there is a decision to do that, it still has to materialize. And this is another point in which we can take different views globally and regionally in Latin America. While Europe and North America can accelerate these kind of renewable investments. In Latin America, it will be much harder. We still have millions of people burning wood every day in order to cook their food. So there is still a long way to go in Latin America in order to replace other forms of energy with something more friendly, something that can elevate in general the whole population out of the poverty line. So I think that I share the expectation and the motivation that Giovani has shared with us, that we will have a lot of more oil and natural gas coming out of Latin America for many more years.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of our audience will be happy to hear that news and will agree with you. As you mentioned, it is very difficult to look into the future, and we try to avoid, gazing into the crystal ball, because as you say, we often end up eating our own words. But another prediction that I'd like to ask both of you, looking towards the future, in 2022, and I guess for the rest of 2021 as well, do you see an increase in exploration activity across Latin America? I know, Jorge, you mentioned it was unbelievable that Brazil managed to increase production last year, but what about on the exploration front? How do you see that playing out in the next 18 months? This time we can start with you, Jorge.
Okay, well, again, I think that this has a connection with the licenses and concessions, as we explained before. In certain cases, companies, they have to do exploration because it was part of their commitment. I think that we will see exploration in those terms in Latin America in general in 2021, 2022. With some exceptions, like in the case of Guyana, where ExxonMobil has already 19 discoveries, but they are still drilling. They think that they may have some more prospects and objectives to go. So naturally, in this year and the next year, companies will try to resume production. So exploration is not a high priority, but we will still see exploration, and that happened even in 2020. When you look at the number of offshore wells that were drilled in offshore Mexico, they drill more wells in offshore on the Mexican side of the Gulf of Mexico than on the US side of the Gulf of Mexico. This, of course, has to do with geology, because you don't drill if you don't think that you're not going to have a discovery. But it also has connections with the licenses and the previous commitments that companies have been doing. So I don't think that exploration is still a priority again. Companies have enough in their inventory in order to develop, but we will still see exploration, particularly in the offshore, because of previous commitments.
Very interesting. Giovani, what are your views on exploration in Latin America over the next 18 months?
Yeah, my views are very similar to Jorge's views. And Jorge has mentioned in one of his comments before, I mean, we have commitments that have been established before the pandemic. Several of them have been suspended by the government because of the pandemic issues. So we will resume that in 2022. This will be happening in Brazil. We have done many bid rounds in the previous years before the pandemic, and therefore we will have a lot of exploration activity coming out of Brazil in starting again in 2022 after those suspensions are lifted. So this is one aspect. We have this bid round happening this year also. I've mentioned before, 92 blocks. It's a lot happening in October in Brazil. So this also will be driving a higher exploration for the near future. We expect the bid round to be successful. I mean, it's that's why the government is organizing that. It's our impression that we will have a successful bid round. So in the end, I think we expect to see more exploration in 2022 and even more in 2023 when compared to 2022.
Yeah, if I may add to that, Michael, I think that is an excellent point, because even throughout the pandemic, the countries that have been consistent in the bid rounds have seen successful bid rounds. And that is the case of Colombia, for instance, as well. So companies, they still have appetite for exploration because obviously they are participating in the bid rounds. But remember that exploration is a long-term cycle. So a bid round that you have today may successfully have a well drill in probably 5 years from now. So companies still have to feed up, the pipeline of opportunities with these exploration blocks, and that is happening. And I'm happy that countries like Brazil or Colombia never stop in terms of the bid rounds, and they have successful bid rounds and more forms of bid rounds in order to make these exploration blocks accessible to more companies in those countries.
Definitely. My next question is which Latin American countries will offer the best opportunities in the next 12 months for E&P operators and contractors? Now, I guess we can start this time with Giovani, and going back to the theme of bid rounds in Brazil, I guess we can delve maybe a little bit more into that if that's possible. Talking about the opportunities in Brazil, Giovani, how do you see the next bid round? Are you confident that it will be successful? And what is the government, or what has the government done, or the Mines and Energy Ministry done, or ANP for that matter, to maybe attract investors this time? Is there anything that has been done differently this time to the last oil round, which I think was 2019, if I'm not wrong? Perhaps you could shed some light on that for us, Giovani.
Yeah, first of all, I think, and it's important to highlight that because lots of people that do not work in the industry or follow the numbers understand that. But the offering that we have of blocks in Brazil is of course, because of our size, is unparalleled when you consider 2 other countries, right? So 92 blocks. Usually, I would say it's probably if you add all the blocks all together of the Latin American countries in more than 1 year, you wouldn't reach 92 blocks as we have in just one offering in Brazil. So, and it's of course the part of our advantage of being big, but part of our challenge also of have big demands and a big country to manage, right? So the two things come together. But when you think about offering, definitely we are always in a good position. We have still many areas to explore and places where we have had good results. Some of them with environmental challenges over the years that have disappointed some companies with the way it has been handled by the government. But overall, I think the result is positive, and that's why companies keep investing in Brazil. So I think we have, during the last 3 or 4 years, especially 3 years before the pandemic, we actually have been improving our terms and conditions for companies, both in terms of the production sharing contract that we have, and also of the concession, with several things being changed. No longer Petrobras being the mandatory operator for the production sharing, lower local content requirements. So many improvements that have made the last few rounds very much successful. So we didn't have any major improvement right now. What we always had, and it's part of our procedure, is that the government has a public audience and makes the terms available to the market, and the companies sometimes together through the Association of Oil Companies called IBP, they provide comments for the improvement of the terms and conditions of the contract in Brazil. So we may see some minor improvements, let's say, but overall the concession regime, which is the one that we have a bid round this year for those 92 blocks, it has been tested over the years. It's our first regime that started in the late 90s, and therefore, companies are comfortable with that. I think the most of our discussions recently with regards to that regime have been in terms of local content, and this issue has been fixed. We haven't seen companies complaining about that recently. and definitely they are comfortable with those contracts, and of course always willing to provide minor comments for improvement. But overall, I think it's a regime that has been tested and they are happy with that. So I think we will see a successful bid round, also because of that, together also with the attractiveness of the areas and the pricing of the oil.
Excellent, very interesting point you make, and Jorge also mentioned that Brazil has been very consistent over the last 5 or 6 years with their oil rounds, probably the most consistent in Latin America. So that's good news for investors there. How do you see that, Jorge? Which other Latin American markets do you think will be appealing to E&P operators as they look for new opportunities over the next few years?
Well, yeah, we mentioned over and over again Brazil and Colombia, and Brazil is doing a remarkable job of incentivizing exploration in the offshore outside the core area of the pre-salt to the north and to the south. So let's see what happens with the next bid rounds. But it's very encouraging that the country has decided to evolve into other forms of contract that is necessary. Once you have more frontier exploration and companies are trying to expand on the envelope, right? I think that this year Brazil, for the first time, will offer blocks in international waters. That is, for me, is the first time ever that has been done in Latin America. So I'm very hopeful that that will get a lot of interest. But Colombia is the other country where, for over 20 years, they have been holding successful bid rounds, even during the pandemic, like in the case of Brazil. Colombia has been very imaginative because most of the bid rounds, I would say 99% of the bid rounds, are onshore in comparison with Brazil, that is offshore, and has been the domain of smaller companies or startups. But the country has been even putting together special conditions for very, very small companies, and what they call the V League or the Little League, like in soccer. So they are making special conditions for companies that cannot qualify as a regular operator to make smaller opportunities accessible to these companies as well. Other places where this is happening, you know, in Argentina, the provinces are restarting also offering blocks in mimicking what Colombia started as a permanent bid round, where basically, if you are interested in an area, you can go to the government and ask the government for that area and put your bid in competition. That has been done very successfully in Brazil as well, and now Argentina is implementing that also. In Latin America, it's unavoidable that you know, different governments and different regimes change conditions from time to time. So hopefully that is the case in Ecuador, and Ecuador may resume bid rounds that were fairly successful in the past years in Ecuador as well. I think that that will be the case of Trinidad and Tobago as well. There is a lot of offshore, more frontier acreage available in order to complement the existing natural gas production that the country is very successfully exporting through LNG. So there are several countries where companies interested in exploration will have opportunities. I want to mention Suriname as well. They have already conducted a shallow water bid round where they received multiple offers, and I think that they will be announcing follow-ups, trying to, you know, start with this virtuous circle of making more acreage available.
Excellent. We have quite a few questions from the audience. We're running out of time, so we'll try and get a couple of those questions in. The first one is, what chances do unconventionals have in Brazil and Colombia? We've seen, obviously, unconventionals being developed on a commercial scale in Argentina, but elsewhere we haven't really seen too much. I think Colombia, there has been there was an option at the end of last year, and that continued early this year. We haven't seen unconventional drilling actually begin in Colombia yet. So perhaps maybe one of you could speak about the prospects for unconventionals in Colombia and Brazil, and possibly elsewhere in the region as well.
Okay, I can start with Colombia because Colombia will have a couple of pilots. One has been assigned to Ecopetrol in an area called Calais in Llanos. And the plan is to start that pilot drilling at the end of this year. And the other one was assigned to ExxonMobil. I believe that it is called Platero, that probably will be drilled next year. So Colombia is following a very conscious, solid work in order to lay out the foundation to do unconventionals in Colombia. Has been very contentious so far. I read just today that the court has dismissed an application to cancel these pilots, but still have to rule out regarding this. So it is happening, and Colombia has a great potential for unconventionals. Basically, the Luna formation, which is massive in Colombia, is available there, and the country is already importing from time to time natural gas. So having access to the unconventionals in Colombia, it will be critical for the energy transition and the energy security of Colombia. In Brazil, I will leave Giovani to speak about that. Brazil, of course, has incredible amount of unconventional potential there, but is still not rule as Colombia is doing. So companies that wanted to do unconventional, they have to wait until the government put together all the rules and regulations in order to do that. That is my understanding, but Giovani is an expert here, so I leave the floor to him.
Yeah, I think the challenge with unconventional in Brazil, it really relates to the environment and environmental issues related to that. The environmental authorities and the prosecutors, they have autonomy, which means that even if the government do a bid round for unconventional, for example, the companies would have to live with the risk that they may acquire a block and actually an injunction from requested by environmental authority or prosecutor could prevent them from exploring because of environmental issues. So we still have to evolve in this discussion of environmental impacts of unconventional and our potential in Brazil. So it's a discussion that we still have, I would say, a long way to go. What the government is doing is, because we have so much conventional resources, really paying attention to that and leave that discussion for later. But at some point, definitely, we will have to solve this issue. So right now, the experiences we had, really, companies have been prevented by lawsuits in the cases where the government has done auctions with unconventional potential. The companies have been prevented from doing any kind of unconventional exploration because of those lawsuits from authorities, and definitely it makes them scary from investing again, right? And scared from investing again. So I think it's not going to be easy for us to unlock that potential, and we need the government to solve that with the other authorities, in particular environmental authorities.
Yeah, in general, in Latin America, the issue of unconventional, the discussion of unconventional, has been going on for some time now. But I would say that in general is not very well informed. I live in a country where unconventional is 90% of the total production, and half an hour north from my home, there are unconventional wells that have been drilled, and all these environmental concerns can be addressed. So the industry has evolved a lot since the first unconventional wells drill and frack in the US. So all the techniques that we have available today are very much improved, and those concerns around water contamination, seismicity, things like that can be easily be avoided and properly addressed in more modern with more modern techniques of drilling and fracking.
Great, fantastic. Another question we have from the audience is, what is your assessment of regulatory risk in the region, particularly in Mexico, and social unrest in Colombia affecting expenditure decisions? So I guess we can make that even broader, not only regulatory risk, but I guess the investment climate in general. I know, Jorge, you touched on the situation in Colombia. How do you feel that might impact investments going forward? And I guess if you would feel comfortable as well to talk about the regulatory situation as a whole, broadly speaking, in Latin America, particularly in Mexico.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Look, if you invest in Latin America or you are investing in Latin America, you know that the region has several changes in regimes from the political standpoint. What is important to mention here is that in general, there has been an instability in concessions and licenses. Let's take the example of Mexico. Mexico has paused, has stopped on the bid rounds, but there are over 100 contracts that have been signed from the previous 3 bid rounds, and they're upheld. The rule of law is still holding there. There hasn't been any changes. The companies that are present in Mexico are charging ahead with their investment plans. There are over $40 billion in investments coming out of these concessions, and 16 or 18 has been already executed. So as you see, there might have been, several announcements by the government, but that hasn't impacted the investment decisions by the companies in Mexico, at least on the upstream side, on the E&P side. I think that is, along with Brazil, Mexico, and Brazil are the only 2 countries where they have changed the constitution in order to do these energy transitions and opening up their countries to foreign investment. And that is a long way to say that these changes have been very stable. The example of Brazil is highly remarkable, but that is happening in other countries throughout Latin America. Yes, Colombia have had social unrest for the past month, and that has impacted the production, but in general, the country is well regarded as a beacon in Latin America for investment. Just last year, the biggest transaction in Latin America was done in Colombia, where the Carlyle private investment group bought all the onshore participation of Occidental in Colombia. $800+ million on a single transaction. So with that, you see that there are opportunities, and Latin America in general is very fluid in opportunities for companies that have a long-term view and are willing to weather some changes in sentiment from time to time in some countries. But in the long term, Latin America has never disappointed investors in these areas.
Thank you for that response, Jorge. Giovani, you mentioned local content in one of your responses in Brazil, and the fact that investors have seen stability with the regularity of oil rounds, and the fact that they've had their demands attended to with local content. It seems like they're all very comfortable with the current regulations. How do you see that going forward in Brazil? Do you see that continuing even with the prospect of a new government perhaps coming in next year? I know we don't want to go too much into politics, but how do you see the overall panorama on the regulatory front in Brazil?
Yeah, I think we my view is similar to Jorge's view. I mean, over time, Brazil has proven to be a country that has respected contracts. We have never had a case of direct expropriation in the oil and gas industry. We have case of indirect when you think about environmental licenses, for example, that haven't been granted because authorities are autonomous, but in the end, the parties understand that this is a risk and they know how the rules are played in Brazil. So I think we have been beyond that situation already. Of course, it is a challenging country. We have federal government, state government, municipalities, and from time to time, one of them may issue a rule that is somehow controversial for the industry. But I think the other point that needs to be mentioned is how courts have been reacting to that over time. So I would say that this discussion between state and private investors is a tradition in Latin America, and Brazil is also the case. I mean, we always have this discussion between how much government we should have and how much private parties we should have. And this is often taken to courts, and it includes not only the ANP bid rounds. Basically, we have lawsuits for any bid rounds in Brazil, but also even for the Petrobras divestments, which also are changing a lot the landscape of the oil industry in Brazil. They are more than 90% of the Petrobras divestments are litigated in courts, and the decisions, and we have been already in the superior courts, is always in favor of, you know, the contracts, the private parties being able to acquire something or an asset or a company or entity from the government, and that this should be respected. So on top of the fact that the mindset is to respect the private parties coming from the government, the laws and the courts have been also very respectful to that. And I think the parties understand that they may have to litigate somehow some of those risks, but the outcomes have been so far very good for the investors.
Great. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We've run out of time. We've been here for 1 hour. So Giovani and Jorge, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your enlightening comments. And we hope that you can perhaps join us in a future webinar as well. I'm sure our audience would feel the same way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Jorge, it was a great pleasure. Michael as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge and Giovanni, and thank you especially for mentioning BNamericas 25th anniversary. It's a month of celebration here for us. And as Michael was saying, we will continue hosting these webinars this year. So please stay tuned for information on the next ones. And if you're not a BNamericas subscriber but want to see what we do, who we are, please visit BNamericas.com. Thank you very much all. Have a nice day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Clients change, businesses change. The world is transforming faster than ever, and the opportunities are there, waiting for us. Over 20 years of digital innovation have turned us into the leading business intelligence provider in Latin America. BNamericas has a database with thousands of industrial projects, company profiles, key contacts, news, reports, and data, all in one easy-to-use platform. Every day, more than 50 on-the-ground journalists and experts analyze the region's major industries. Explore projects that feature opportunities for your business. Find the companies participating in those projects and connect with their decision makers. Make the best business decisions with all the facts and insights you need about the industries that are driving the Latin American economy. Get timely reports with the latest news about projects, regulations, and investments. Stay on top of the business trends. Find out what the risks and opportunities are for your business by reading the reports and analysis of our on-the-ground experts throughout Latin America. Redefine your business strategy and choose the path to success. BNamericas, connecting opportunities.